We're going to launch into a panel, our first panel of the afternoon. Come on up. I'll just do boy, girl, boy, girl. Oh no, we're not here. All right. This morning, Google and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation published a paper on the role of technology in circular cities and in terms of making the circular economy work in urban environments. And so we're going to talk, use that as the basis to talk about a number of things, but here to have that conversation is Kate Brandt, who is the lead for sustainability at Google. Well, you could read their titles right there. Ashimas Sukhdev, who is with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, heading up the Government and Cities program, and Kate Daly, who is the SVP for the Center for Urban Innovation for a little startup city called New York, the Economic Development Commission. So first of all, welcome to all of you. Kate, maybe we start with you and just talk a little bit about this report and why you worked with EMF, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, to put it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been partnering with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation as global partners since 2015. And when we entered into the partnership, and we had the chance, I actually had the chance to be on this stage last year with Ellen MacArthur talking about this, we established a goal that we wanted to integrate circular economy thinking into our infrastructure and our operations and our culture. And so we've been very focused on thinking about how can these circular economy strategies, making our systems more restorative and regenerative, how can they influence how we operate, how we think about how we operate our data centers, how we build our real estate. But increasingly, we also really got interested in what is the role of technology in establishing a more circular economy. And as we started having more conversations and meeting folks through the great network that the foundation has put together for circular cities, we thought the city could be a really interesting place to further investigate how does technology help to change the system and help to make cities more restorative and regenerative from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, and have a business case. And so in this paper, we really tried to dig into that.
So what, from your perspective, and I want to hear from all three of you, what is a circular city?
Ashma, do you want to take that
well,
one?
No, I guess just start with you.
I'm happy to. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think for us, the way that we think, so if you think about the broad concept of circular economy, how do you make systems more restorative and regenerative? When you look at it at a city scale, there's really four particular areas that we focused on in the paper: the built environment, the energy system, mobility, and then kind of the role of IoT in connecting all of that. And we see a lot of opportunity there. And some examples that we get into in the paper are, how do we bring more renewable energy to cities? We've built a tool called Project Sunroof that enables either a homeowner or an entire community to see how much renewable capacity, how much solar opportunity is there on their rooftops. And I can get into more examples as we go.
Those are examples, but let me go down to try this with Ashima. I still want to know, what does it mean for a city to be circular? And you run something out of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation called the Circular Cities Network. So maybe talk about what some of those dozen or so cities involved in and what they envision as circular.
Yeah, exactly. So in the last year or so, we've actually been kind of co-creating and discussing with those cities, what does a circular economy in the city actually mean? I think there's a few elements. First and foremost, it's obviously applying circular economy principles to urban systems. It's cities that are actually designing out waste from their urban systems. And that's not just material waste, it's also things like underutilized assets and infrastructures in that city. If you kind of break that down a bit and think about the built environment, for example, it's in cities, how can you actually build flexible, modular infrastructure? How can you use efficient construction practices? How can you use the right materials in those buildings? And how can you make sure that once those buildings are actually built, they are being used effectively and not just sitting empty most of the time? So
Ashima, we hear about green cities, sustainable cities, smart cities, several others I'm not thinking of right now, cities. Is this a new thing? Is this going to be a whole new meme that we have to be thinking about circularity, or how does this connect to everything else we've been talking about so far?
Hopefully not. I mean, some of these concepts have been around for a long time. We see the circular economy as a way for cities to actually achieve some of their other agendas. So how can the circular economy and this idea of a circular city actually encourage and help with economic development in cities? How can it help with resilience goals, climate goals? So we definitely don't want to just add one more piece of vocabulary to the table. We're seeing the circular economy as almost a delivery mechanism for a number of different goals that cities are trying to achieve today.
So I want to ask you who's sort of already at the head of the class, but I have a feeling that it's the person on your right. So Kate Daly, I was really surprised reading in this paper and then getting to talk to you a little bit about all that's going on in New York City under the umbrella of circularity. Talk us a little bit about that and what's driving that.
Well, I think what's interesting about New York is that the city itself can serve as a model for some of the new circular technologies and innovations, but at the same time, we're also seeking to catalyze growth in the private sector and really support the innovation that's coming out of the density of industries and talent in New York. And so just as we want to be a model as a circular city that is a smart city, that is a green city, we also want to make sure that the private sector has the support that it needs for catalytic change, because we certainly can't do it alone. And so some of the work that we've been doing is we plan to launch an innovation challenge this fall to mobilize some of our smart cities and sustainability and resiliency companies specifically around a circular economy challenge. The City of New York has reformed its procurement guidelines so that we can really direct city agencies to buy things that adhere to a lot of the green sustainability guidelines that have been built up over the years, but also to start to include circular economy principles into the purchasing. New York has huge buying power, both as the city government, but also the markets that exist within New York City.
Can you give an example of how you've tweaked a procurement spec that may have been already a green or environmentally preferable product, but is now more geared towards circularity?
The rules haven't yet been issued, but the sneak preview would be carpets. Really thinking about, and I think many people in the room are familiar with the circular work that's been done around carpets and the design of carpets so that it's for circularity. So there's return to manufacturers, two of the key principles of the circular economy. And so that's one example of something that we've incorporated into the guidelines.
So some of this sounds to me, putting on my cynical journalist hat, that it's a lot of the same stuff that we've been talking about. We've been talking about carpet recycling for a long time, and Shaw and Interface and a bunch of companies have been doing that, taking that back. We've been talking about a lot of things, the Internet of Things and a lot of other technology, electric vehicles and vehicle to grid and all kinds of things that are part and parcel of this. How is this different, or is it just a new framing? That's what I'm sort of trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we talked about this and as Ashima said, I think what circular economy adds is the systems framing, it's a way to give purpose, for example, to a lot of the opportunities that technology provides us in the service of making a city that works better, that is more restorative and regenerative, where we can design waste out of systems. So to me, that's what's useful about it. It's taking that systems approach and then giving a lot more purpose to the data sets and really enabling our city officials and our communities to use that data to really drive the positive change.
Yeah. Circular economy, of course, is not just about next-gen recycling or keeping the material loops flowing. It's also about product longevity, product utilization, product sharing. So how does that fit in? I mean, again, some of these have been around, like car sharing and things like that. I would imagine that I would hope that we might see a rise of sort of the fix-it, repair, upgrade economy. And if so, do you see things like that? Do you see circular cities, General Ashima, I'll ask you this, as an economic development job creation opportunity?
Definitely. I mean, the initial indications we've seen through the Foundation's research through conversations we're having with cities. There's a huge opportunity there in terms of the repair industry, remanufacturing, but I think this is also broader than that, and there's still a lot of questions on how exactly the circular economy can influence economic activity in cities, and that's some of the work we're going to be doing in the next year. But I think that there's definitely a strong indication that this is an economic generation opportunity.
Katie, you're in the Economic Development Corporation, so
Yes.
obviously you see that as an opportunity.
Well, I see it as one of the main reasons that we're able to add a lot of actors and partners to addressing this challenge. I think that the circular economy is a framework that can bring a lot more collaboration to a space where people who don't see sustainability necessarily linked to job creation, even though of course it absolutely is, I think that it can really diversify the base of people who are solving for some of these problems. And from our perspective, really looking at what are some of the emerging new business models, that's where we want to really be supportive, because those disruptive new business models, if they're able to scale, are things that can really address how what we all hear people calling it the fourth industrial revolution. Well, all the disruption that's coming from automation and the gig economy and digital technologies and the way that they change the way that we work, the way that we produce goods, technology platforms change the way that we interact with each other. What we want to do is harness all of that innovation and use it to address the consequences of the first three industrial revolutions and the incredible impact that's had on our environment and on our economy. And so looking at some of the innovative new businesses that are emerging involve things like on-demand manufacturing, so that you could 3D print a garment with zero waste and not produce more garments than are needed. And so how do we take innovative approaches like that and scale that? And that's 100% an innovative business model that's contributing to the economy and to job creation.
Well, you're talking about business models, and you're talking about disruption and innovation and new business models. I mean, where does the private sector come into this? Are they leading this, coming to you and saying, this is what we want? Or are you saying, this is the vision for the city, and we need your help? So Kate, how do you see this as the private sector here?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, what we've been really focused on is how can we offer tools that help to unlock data, that help both individuals, like the example I gave of Project Sunroof, or whole cities do better planning. So for example, we have through Waze, through our navigation app, we have something called the Connected Citizens Program, and we're working with over 400 cities around the world to help them do better planning. So that's a way that we can partner. We can take a tool that we offer to individuals, but also provide new data sets that can help cities develop better. So that's really what we've been focused on, is how do we use our technology to enable positive change, to enable this movement towards a more circular design.
And do cities know that they want these things? Or are you going in and selling more and trying to show them the benefits? Or are they saying, hey, Google or anyone else, can you help us solve our congestion problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Connected Citizens Program has been a great example, and they've both proactively reached out as well as had a lot of cities approach them. Or another project that we talk about in the case study is called Project AirView. And this is where we're taking air quality sensors and attaching them to our street view cars, the cars that drive around and create Google Maps.
This is with ACLIMA.
Exactly, with our partners, at both the Environmental Defense Fund and ACLIMA. And there, we've done that work in Oakland, where you guys are, across the bay, and in the Central Valley, and in LA. And we were able to release the first data set for Oakland recently, and EDF produced these incredible maps that then show how air quality can differ from one side of a highway to another. Then that's information that's available to the community, that's available to city officials to then try to drive change.
Ashrama, this the Circular Cities Network is global. You've got, I think, probably 10 or 11 of the 12 cities are outside the U.S. How is this evolving outside the United States? Who's sort of leading, and how is that, where do you sort of see, if you could pick one of those cities, this is the future, or at least the future beginning to take shape, where would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of outside of the US, we're seeing a lot of interest in circular cities in Europe. I'd say London, Paris, Amsterdam are all cities that have come out and laid out circular economy route maps or strategies, very strong indications that these cities want to be working on the circular economy going forward. Outside of Europe, we're seeing activity in South America, India, China. Often it doesn't have the circular economy label as such, but it's still very much activity that relates to this topic. Picking one city as an example, I think London's a fantastic example of a city that's kind of taken the idea and run with it. They have circular economy business support programs, as sort of Kate was indicating towards. They love this from sort of the innovation lens. They are developing a collaboration hub where they're actually bringing the private sector together with universities and city officials across the board to really work on this topic. So I think that model has been a really inspiring one.
So what's the vision in New York? I mean, when you envision a circular city, what does that look like?
Well, we've already set very ambitious goals. So New York City has a commitment to zero waste by 2030 and a commitment to an 80% reduction in our greenhouse gases by 2050. So these are ambitious goals, and there's no way that we can only accomplish this by one city agency or one actor within the city acting alone. And so we really see public-private partnerships as a very important part of the work that we're doing. Just going back to what Kate said about this issue, it's not just Google going out to the cities or the cities coming to Google, but a lot of organic relationships that come about because of these shared visions. So one thing that we're very excited about in New York is a partnership with Google and the engineering firm Arup and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to launch what we're calling the Circularity Lab, which is a circular demonstrator relating to the built environment and construction materials, and really demonstrating the concepts of design for disassembly and assessing the health of the materials that are being reused. How do we have a second life already inherent in those materials, whereas the manufacturer going to take back those materials after the demonstrator is done. So you'll hear more about that in a panel tomorrow that Kate and Arup are going to be speaking on. But it's a bi-coastal effort. There's also going to be a demonstrator launched in San Francisco. And so that's a great example of cities uniting with the private sector and with each other, and really acknowledging that there's no way that we can accomplish these ambitious goals alone without that sort of partnership.
So what is the Circularity Lab going to be in the Bay Area, Kate?
Yeah, so as Kate mentioned, we'll have this panel tomorrow, and actually my wonderful colleague who may be in the room, Robin Bass, is leading this for us out of our real estate team. And so we have done a lot of work, and we actually talk about this in the paper as well, around healthy materials in the built environment, and we've partnered with the Healthy Building Network, and more recently several other partners to continue to develop this tool. And so this is a tool that we've used in over 200 projects around the world for our own construction to enable building project teams to collaborate, to choose healthier materials, to communicate with our suppliers, to get greater visibility. And we saw a great opportunity to take that to the next level, as well as a lot of interest we have, and as Kate was mentioning, this concept of design for disassembly and reuse. How do we be very intentional about that? And so through this partnership, we're able to bring some of our learnings to the table, but also work with Arup, with the foundation, with the City of New York, and here in the Bay Area. And we're not sure where we're going to put it yet here in the Bay Area, but we really like the idea of this being a bi-coastal initiative, and that we'll actually be building physical places where people can come experience the opportunities and some of the challenges as well, and then ultimately have it be something that can be entirely disassembled by the circular economy principles.
Come to Oakland.
We should talk about it. We'd love to talk about it.
So I want to go back to Kate Daly, and I want to hear from the other two, because I didn't quite get the vision. I want you to tell me a story of circular New York in, let's call it, we're sitting here and it's now Verge 2020. So 3 years, what's that story that you hope to be able to tell? And I know that Circular City is probably a generational shift to really get there, and so I don't expect that story is going to be that idyllic. But what's the near-term story? I'd love to hear each of you tell me a story of what you envision about a real city or about any city.
Yeah, I think our vision for New York would be that the city itself can serve as a model for circular principles and a circular economy, that we would be able to tabulate exactly how many jobs had been generated through our programmatic support of initiatives across all of the sectors that we work in, whether it's manufacturing or fashion or tech, And that in addition to the city itself and the assets that the city owns being a model, that we were able to catalyze in the private sector something that's approaching systems change, something where we've been able to see these disruptive technologies scaled and brought to a new level. So within the next 3 years, that's not going to happen, but my plan is to partner with a lot of impatient people and harness the impatience across the board and see if we can start making incremental changes with a very clear shared goal of systems change.
You think this can be done with incremental changes? Because this sounds like a fairly radical departure from how New York or any city operates.
Well, the goal of zero waste by 2030 for the city that produces the most trash on the planet and then spends $1 billion to cart it away each year, that's a fundamental goal that we have to achieve. So I think that with each passing month and year, the urgency of what's before us becomes more clear to actors who may not already be invested to date.
Yeah, Ashima, tell me a story.
Story. Well, I think the most inspiring story here is actually thinking about how people will actually, and citizens will start to experience a circular city. I think that's when you're thinking about mobility and the built environment, the buildings that people live in with healthy materials and flexible and modular accessibility as cities change. And I think there's really a lot of interesting activity that can happen in food systems and how that value is captured and so on. There's a lot of stories to tell there, and that's exactly something that we're going to be working on the next year to create a more comprehensive vision for what the circular city looks like with cities like New York. So yeah, I think that's sort of what we're hoping to do.
Kate Brandt?
Yeah, and I think for us, we're really looking forward to continuing to partner with the Circular Cities Network at the foundation and continuing to road test how do we partner with cities, how do we enable them to utilize our tools in ways to really drive this change. Continuing to do more things like we did, for example, the Ways Connected Citizens program. They worked with the city of with Brazil as they were preparing to host the Olympics, and they were able to help them radically rethink how they were doing new infrastructure planning. So how do we do more work like that, and how do we begin to pair some of these tools together in partnership with the foundation and with partners like Kate in New York?
Good. I want to get to the question in a minute, but before, Kate, I want to ask you, Kate Brandt, Google is kind of a city, the Googleplex in Mountain View, and then you're building this massive new, it's almost another city. I mean, how many people is that going to accommodate, this big new campus?
Yeah, so yeah, we're going in Sunnyvale, just up the road, and in San Jose down the road as well. So we'll have several thousand new folks accommodated over the years.
So you're building some small cities. Are they going to be circular cities?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've been thinking a lot about how do these principles apply in our own built environment. So I talked about the healthy materials work. The other thing we talk about in the paper is we've been really focused around food waste. We serve 3 meals a day to our employees. So we've been using a technology solution called Lean Path to work on food waste and reducing pre-consumer food waste in our kitchens.
Is that an Alphabet company or?
It's not. It's a technology partner from up in Oregon. And we've also been experimenting with, how do we use shipping containers to grow food and use, 95% less water in the process and have, fresh herbs and veggies to bring over to the kitchen.
So on-site on your campuses.
So and we also talked about the Circularity Lab, which perhaps could sit at Google at one point. So I think we're really interested in how do we pilot a lot of these principles in our own operations, and then how do we share those learnings and then ultimately open source those tools like our goal is with Portico.
So you become a learning lab that hopefully will inure to New York and lots of other cities. Elaine, what questions do we have?
A lot of questions about inclusion and equity. And I know you guys addressed a few items in that area, but I think the main thing is about how to engage all citizens on the implementation of a circular city vision so that it is more equitably distributed. Yeah,
what does a circular city do, or can it potentially do to inclusion and equity? Ashima, you look like you want to get...
I'm still definitely exploring that question, but I think, when you're thinking about circular local production, for example, I think there's a lot of interesting activity that can create, again, the repair industry, the distributive manufacturing, et cetera. So I think there's through that lens of how do we actually close loops within the city, how do we redistribute manufacturing across local levels, I think there's something to be had there.
Yeah, Kate Daly, is that built into your vision and plans?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think under this administration, Mayor de Blasio has made very clear how important the issues of income inequality and equity are to all of the administration's work. So I think in particular when we were talking about waste issues and end-of-pipe issues, those, as Van Jones was talking about yesterday, there's a differential impact on different communities, and we certainly see that in New York. And I think the more that we can solve for innovative solutions so the waste doesn't reach the end of pipe and is never seen as waste, but is seen as a resource, so that we're not just every year throwing out, I think it's 33 million tons of garbage,
Wow.
193,000 tons that's just clothing and textile waste, that we're treating our resources as if they're disposable plastic bottles. And that has a huge impact both on the communities that have to absorb all of that, and also I think there's a real opportunity for the jobs of the future to be linked to new industries that will arise with the circular economy.
Yeah, I think that inclusion and equity piece has got to be baked in early on and significantly, and not as an afterthought if this is really going to work. And I hope that becomes very much a vision of circular cities as you move forward. But there's a lot to talk about, and it's going to be really interesting space to watch. I hope the lab, I'll look forward to that and to seeing what comes out of that. So lots more to talk about here. But for now, please join me in thanking Kate, Ashima, and Kate.